All right, right now we have one rectangle, and that is where the mouse is drawn. When we put our buttons on the screen, like in menu, normally you'll have start or continue, and then you'll have another button right here. Maybe this is options. And then we have another button for credits or high score or quit or whatever. You're going to have these buttons all lined up. We're going to do collision detection between rectangles to know if our mouse is intersecting this button, if the button's rectangle and the mouse rectangle are intersecting each other. There's a function that can check that. We'll know that this is selected. That's how we're going to do this. So there's an SDL function we'll use for that. There is a problem though. What if my mouse is right here or right here? Which button is selected? Both?
Whichever side the mouse has, whichever the rectangles should have. If you have more of the mouse on the top button, it should go to the top, at the halfway point.
Okay, you can write that code. That could be done. You could do that, but we're going to do it a much easier way. No, without writing that, both are selected, and when you click, it's going to execute whichever one comes first in the code. All right, and that's like poor operation. You don't want that. If your mouse is the standard arrow or whatever, and the point is in the top left corner, then you want that to be what you're checking for collision. And so I am going to move, or I'm going to add a rectangle to my mouse. I'm going to add a tiny little rectangle to the top left corner that is 1 pixel by 1 pixel. And that will be the one I use for collision. I'll still use the big one to draw the mouse, but for collision detection, I use a little one, 1 pixel. And that way, if my mouse is right here, this is the one that's selected. Right here, neither are selected, because I'm looking at this guy. Does that make sense? Everybody understand what we're about to do? Now, if your mouse, if you want the point of contact to be somewhere other than the top left corner, you can offset this. You can move your rectangle to the middle or to the whatever works for your cursor. But what I'm about to do is going to go to the top left corner. So, that being said, let's add another rectangle here. I'm going to call it a point. And then we'll move over to our constructor and set this guy up. So it'll be point dot h equals 1 and point dot w equals 1. So it's a 1 by 1 rectangle for collision detection. The x and y are not important. We're going to set those when we set these guys up here in update. Let everyone get this. I don't want to go too fast. If I get to going too fast, let me know. All right, so after we set the x and the y for the mouse that we draw, let's also set the point to match that. Point.x equals rec.x and point.y equals rec.y. And now, if you don't want yours in the top left corner, this is where you would change that. You would say, well, I want mine centered, and let's say I want my point to be in the top center. Then it wouldn't be the x, it would be the x plus 25. If it's a 50 by 50, we'll scoot over 25. That puts us in the middle, but still at the very top. And so that's where you can adjust your offsets or wherever you want that point of contact to be. I decided we're not going to do this there, so if you have that comment, we'll scrap that. Alright, so our mouse has been upgraded. We now have a point of contact. Let's move over into our states. We need to check for collision between the mouse and the button. And you could do that in a lot of different places. You could do it here in the state machine. You could do it in mouse, or you can do it in button. What changes? The button's going to change. So may be best to do this in button. We want our button to go from the unselected state to the selected state. So I say we change, or we check for that collision in button. Okay, currently it does not look like a button has an update. Now we declared one, but we never wrote it in there. And in updating the button, we're going to see if the mouse is colliding with it, so we need to get that mouse. And to do that, I'll need to include mouse at the top. We'll pass the mouse in there, check its coordinates against the coordinates of the button, and then determine whether or not it is selected.
Wouldn't you pass the point instead of the mouse?
You could. You could. It's more typing. It's just a pointer, so we're only passing an address anyways. It's not a big deal. But yeah, you could do it that way. You could pass the point. All right, go ahead and define this guy. We'll click on our light bulb here and create a definition. And then step over into button CPP. We've got an update here. Now at the beginning of this, I'm going to assume that this button is not selected. But then I'm going to see if that mouse is hovering over it, and then we're going to change selected if it is. It's important to set this every time, because when you move your mouse off of the button, you want it to go back to the unselected state. So that's why we start with this. Okay, for the collision detection, SDL has a function. You could write this function yourself. The math is not that complicated. It's just arithmetic, but SDL has intersection. This function is going to take in two rectangles that shows A and B pointers there, and we'll turn true or false if there's a collision. So rectangle 1 will be which rectangle for the mouse? Mouse point. And which rectangle for the button? We've got two. You remember what these are for? S stands for source, D stands for destination. Where's the source? The source is on the sprite sheet. We don't care about it. Destination is the screen. That's the one we're checking. Now that function calls for pointers, so we have to send it an address. All right, like I said, this is going to return true or false, so we'll just wrap it in an if statement. All right, and if this is true, what do we need to do? What happens? Button is selected.
So selected equals.
Selected equals true. True. What else? We need to move the source rectangle over to the right side of the sprite sheet. What was that value? Anyone remember? Anyone remember how wide the sprite sheet is? 384 divided by 2. Anything else? I don't know, sometimes when you hover over a button like this, you'll want to play the sound, something like that. So there's that. Now else, we've already set selected to false, so that's fine, but we do need to move our rectangle back over to the unselected state. Alright, that being done, I think that's it for our button update. Let's go back to our state machine and make sure we call update on our buttons. What do we call this guy? Start button? Here, update buttons, so start button, update. And it requires the mouse. Alright, so let's see if that works. Anyone successful? Alright, it seems to be working fine for me. When we click on it now, we want something to happen. Yes? What? What's your error? Now, clicks are events, so we're going to check for mouse events up here in our switch. And then the case is I'm going to refer to the wiki here, SDL wiki. API by category. You can see I've already been through this, but we go to mouse support. No, that's not what I want. I want event handling. Mouse button event. Mouse button event has a button. We have an SDL button up and we have an SDL button down. Normally, when you're doing keys or buttons, you normally want to go with the button up if you're looking for a click. If you're not looking for steady input, if you're just looking for that brief event, you want to go with the up.
Would you use down for like shooting?
Yeah, if it's going to be something continuous like movement or maybe like machine gun shooting or something like that, you might go down. But if you're looking for something like this, if you click on something, you're like, wait, no, and then you want to drag your mouse off of that thing and then release it, you can do that if you go with up. So we're going to do a mouse button up, and then we're going to look for the SDL button left. The mouse button up, mouse button up. Okay, so when a mouse button comes up, it could be the left button or the right button. We'll say if the event dot button, and you have to do button again, equals SDL button underscore left. All right, what are we looking for?
The start button?
All right, we need to know if our button is selected. Now, if there was just one button, you could probably roll these two if statements together. But if start button selected, what do we do now? We could change states. Now, I use the start button. That was bad because I don't have a start state. I have options. But we'll set current equal to options. And that will change our state, but we have another problem. This loop that we are running in is set to true at all times. And we're going to need to bust out of this thing if we want to go actually change states. And go back to main and redo this. So to do that, I'm going to create a bool, state.h. Every class will need this bool to determine whether or not that state needs to continue running or if it's time to change states. So I call this bool running. We'll set that equal to false. And then instead of our update running on 1, we'll run on running. Now running was set to false from the get-go. Where should we change that? You can change it here, or you can change it here. When we enter, you can say running equals true. That makes sense. And then when we want to change states down here, we'll set that guy to false. So that should end our loop. When our loop ends, we will return to main. That's right here. Exit will be called. Nothing happens in exit. We do still have a problem though. It's not going to call exit. It's not going to call this exit. It's going to call that exit. That's not a huge problem right now, but in the grand scope of things, that is a problem. So it might be important to call.
Could we just set the current in the exit instead?
Well, your event handler is in the update, so you don't know where you're going in exit. Here we can check all of the buttons. Right now we only have one, but the menu should have 5 or 6. So you want to be able to change states here, but you could call exit before then if you had important stuff in here that needs to happen. Instead of, yeah, that would work, I think. But we don't want to call exit on options. So if we do it that way, we have to take this line out, and that's okay. So we call update, and then our main loop loops, and we come back to current, which is now options, and we will enter options. I'm going to back out a little bit here. Nothing goes on in options, but let's just see if we do change states. It should break the program when we click the button. Oh, we already broke the program. We have options. We never initialized it, is that the problem? Yeah. Options equals 0, and then we can say options equals new options over in main. So in state CPP, anytime you have a static variable, you need to initialize that in global space. If it's a class variable. I thought of a better way of doing this, or a different way of doing it. I don't know if it's better, but there's actually several different ways of doing it. But the way we're doing it now, these are static variables because we only need one. We have to initialize these in global space, and then we can actually set it in main. Did you get that? All right, let's see if it runs. It runs. We should be able to click the button and the program should break. All right, so that works just fine. We can now copy our update function from menu, and we'll just paste that down into options. we can delete the comments here. Be careful when you're copying. You want to only get your main loop. Just copy that. We'll take it down here to options update and paste that in here. We'll have to make some changes, but for the most part this will be okay. And enter, we need to set running to true. And then from options, we're not looking at start button. I'm going to go back and change start button because it's really options and I want it to look like options. So let's fix that. So I'm going to do a Control-Shift-H. Anywhere it says start button, I'm going to replace that with options button. Okay, so replace all. I hope I didn't break anything. That's kind of dangerous, but YOLO. Alright, so the options button, if I run my program, it still says start. I wanted to say options. Okay, I did break something. What did I break? Alright, where do we create this button? This button is created in the constructor. We need to do all of this stuff in options as well. So I'm going to copy the guts of my main menu constructor here and paste that down in options and then modify it. So the options constructor, we don't need a new mouse. Did we make our mouse static? Is our mouse static? No, it didn't. It belongs to menu. Okay, so options will need a mouse. If we stick with this, options will need a mouse. If you want, you could make it a state variable, a static variable, and there would be one mouse for the entire program. What do y'all want to do?
One mouse.
One mouse is good. I like that. All right, so move this up out of menu, and we'll make it static. And then we'll move over and we'll initialize it. No, mouse. And then in our state constructor up here, we can initialize it in that same if statement. Oh, mouse gets the renderer. Alright, so the mouse is now everywhere. That's fine. We just won't draw it in the actual game, but all of the other states will need it, so this is probably a good way to go about it. Static mouse, initialized once, created once, and we can scrap this line from the options. Now we're down in options constructor here. We're not going to have an options button, we're going to have a menu button. Menu button, menu button. So everywhere it says options, we're going to change that to menu. Only in the option state. Don't get up here and start changing these. And then of course we need to change the declaration. So in the header file, button, menu, button. I'll switch back over to the source file. When I load my options, when I create my option state, it does not get the main menu background. It gets the options background. So I'm going to change that. Now, if you did not call yours options.png, do not type that there. You type whatever you called yours. And then the last thing I want to do, like I said, I want to switch my buttons. If I look at my image here, I'm going to start that 0, 0. I would like to come down. For main menu, I want an options button. And then for options, I want a main menu button. So options is going to be what? X0, Y is what? 64. And then for menu, it should be, let's see, X is 0, Y is 128. For me, now yours may be different. I'm going 0 to 64, and then from 64 to 128. So yours will probably be different depending on how you structured that. And then, yeah, up here in menu, I don't want to select start. I want to select options, so I'll change that to 64. Now let's see if this even runs. We did a lot of changing. Holy cow, it runs. Alright, so I've got options here. I can click on options and it takes me to the options screen. And I've got a main menu button. I didn't do anything, but we got to options. We're getting close. Now to fix that, what do I need to do? I'm in options. I click that button. I want to go back to the menu. What do I got to do?
Mouse down to hover over the options button or main menu button. Actually, they just change current
Menu button is right. What'd you say?
Set current to menu instead of options.
Right, we're going to change our state back to menu instead of options. Let's try this. Hot dog. Works just fine. That's it for the tutorial. You have everything you need now to set up your state machine. I'm going to write this and I'll update what's on Moodle. But for main menu, for your menu state, you're going to need start, options, you don't need menu, credits, leaderboard, and exit. You're going to need 5 buttons. I want you to use an array and a for loop to operate with these guys. For the update and the draw, I want you using a for loop. For initializing them, that you'll do individually. Any questions?